Hello again. Welcome back. In this session, we'll look at how some early thinkers of ancient Greece, China, and India began to view the world. That world was fundamentally different from ours, but we can still relate to it in powerful ways. We can think of it as the childhood of humanity, and like childhood, has a unique brilliance, so it is not of purely academic or historic interest. Seeing things through a child's eyes can give us new insights and challenge our assumptions. As Picasso once said, he spent a lifetime trying to paint like a child. Just as important, ancient philosophy shaped the building blocks, the foundation for much of modern philosophy. Just as Einstein wouldn't have been possible without Newtonian physics. Here's Adam Lexnar's take on why the ancients still speak to us. Early sages, poets, artists, and writers grasped the world in which the natural and social were closely intertwined and science and philosophy were inseparable. The period between 800 and 200 BCE, some 3,000 years ago, was termed the Axial or Axial Age by the German philosopher Karl Jaspers in 1948. He identified this as the time when human beings first became conscious of themselves and asked about the meaning of life. Recent research shows that virtually all the great belief systems emerged around them in many different parts of the world. These traditions continue to exercise a powerful influence. We can gain insights as well as strength and inspiration by getting a handle on this dramatic sweep of historical thought. An overview of the history of philosophy reveals a picture of a wonderful diversity of ideas and tensions. Theories and concepts arose and developed in discussion and conflict with others. Out of this tightly woven web of thought, we will tease out some fundamental shared trends, however diverse their origins. Many thinkers came into conflict with religious and state authorities. On the other hand, others developed ideologies and belief systems that served to strengthen and consolidate the existing hierarchies and ruling classes. Quite a few struggled within their own philosophical systems. In other words, some aspects of their thinking could be revolutionary, while other aspects were the opposite. Back to the fundamental eternal question, the relationship between the world of thought and the world of being or nature. From the earliest times, when humans began to consider their relationship to the world of nature, to each other, and to thought itself, various tendencies emerged. Schools of philosophy divided into those that assert the primacy of spirit or mind over nature, and those who propose the opposite, whereby nature in the broadest sense is viewed as primary, and thought arises out of it. We defined materialism in the last session. Now we'll look at how the concept arose in ancient Greece. There was contact with Africa and Asia, so it was not purely a European phenomenon. The Ionian school of cosmologists was based in the Greek city of Miletus on the east coast of the Aegean Sea, an area which is in today's Turkey, as you can see on this map. They became known as the Physici, or Physiologi, people who wrote about nature. Their names were Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. Another thinker called Heracletus lived in Ephesus, just 30 kilometers north along the coast. This east side of the Mediterranean was at the junction of the emergent Greek civilization and the ancient empires of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Best-selling author, the theoretical physicist Carlo Rovelli, describes how the advances of these ancient thinkers took place against a background of war and destruction. But this moment in time also saw the rise of early forms of democracy, including citizens' assemblies, the precursors of today's developing forms of participative democracy. Those thinkers, Ravelli says, were immersed in the liberty and political fluidity which is typically Greek, in a social space without imperial palaces or powerful priestly castes, where individual citizens decide their own destinies in open agoras, which means civic spaces, where men decide their own laws, where the first parliament in the history of the world gathers, and where, for the first time, men doubt that only the gods can account for the mysteries of the world. The first organized forms of democracy were an integral part of the political and economic transformations around the Mediterranean, which saw the creation of city-states as well as distinct class societies. There was a constant ebb and flow between forms of tyranny and democracy, as tyrants came to power only to be overthrown by movements from below. You can read about this in Democracy Unchained, downloadable from the Real Democracy Movement website. A famous name from those distant times is Heracletus, who lived from 540 to 480 BCE. Heracletus was an aristocrat who lived during the time of democratic revolution, when a rising merchant class took state power from the landed aristocracy. The development of slave labor facilitated this transition. Heracletus was known as the Obscure, partly because his work has come down to us in fragments, but also because his style of writing was mysterious and paradoxical. His most famous saying is, "We step and do not step into the same river. We are and we are not." He fused together opposing ideas in which one thing appears to cancel out the other. He treated every phenomenon as a unity of contradictions and treated it in terms of self-negation. Heracletus saw the world as permanently in existence, not as created by gods or men. Instead, it was, is, and will be eternally living fire, regularly becoming ignited and regularly extinguished, and in flux through the movement of opposing forces. The only permanent thing is the law of perpetual change, otherwise known as the Logos. He said, "The world, which is the same for all, has not been made by any man or god. It ever has been, is now, and ever shall be, ever-living fire." The Encyclopedia Britannica explains it in this way. Heraclitus's understanding of the relation of opposites to each other enabled him to overcome the chaotic and divergent nature of the world. He asserted that the world exists as a coherent system in which a change in one direction is ultimately balanced by a corresponding change in another. Between all things there is a hidden connection, so that those that are apparently tending apart are actually being brought together. Heraclitus stands out not only due to his mysterious sayings, but because in his picture of the world, movement comes from within things themselves, due to the opposing forces within them, which in this course we shall term self-movement. This principle was lost for millennia, but we shall see how much later it was to inspire another revolution in thought. As philosophy developed from this ancient view of things in which spirit and matter were originally seen as unified, two distinct tendencies can be identified. Renaissance artist Raphael painted a host of personalities in his grand fresco called The School of Athens. In this detail you can see Plato on the left, pointing upwards towards his spiritual world of ideal forms, and Aristotle on the right, with the palm of his hand emphasizing materiality. Here is a visualization of the difference between Plato and Aristotle. Plato explained being through the existence of immaterial types of objects, which he called forms or ideas. What we might consider as actual being, matter and space, he said, was non-being. Ideas were eternal, whereas things that we perceive through our senses are transient and relative. He is famous for his allegory of the cave. In this story, humans are prisoners chained to a wall who only perceive the shadows of ideal forms reflected on the walls of the cave. Many still consider Aristotle the greatest thinker of antiquity, and indeed of all time. He attended Plato's school in Athens, but critiqued Plato's idea of disembodied forms. He studied innumerable fields of what we now call science, establishing his own school and library. He regarded all nature as transitioning between matter and form. Aristotle examined concepts of substance and essence, what it is to be, in his Metaphysics. He concluded that any particular substance is a combination of both matter and form, a theory called hylomorphism. He considered that the soul, psyche, as the form or the essence of any living thing. It is not a distinct subject from the body that it is in. Medieval theologians tended to dogmatize Aristotle, so his legacy remains complex and disputed. So, what is materialism? Our natural sound common sense tells us that we live in a physical world, that the universe and all that exists consists of matter in motion. The Encyclopedia Britannica defines materialism as the view that all facts, including facts about the human mind and will and the course of human history, are causally dependent upon physical processes or even reducible to them. The concept of materialism is constantly transforming, originally dating back to the atomists of antiquity and re-emerging in the Enlightenment and again in today's trends. A materialist dialectical view proposes that materialism as existence and consciousness are in a mutually influencing co-evolutionary dialectical relationship. Here is the philosophical meaning of the word idealism. The notion that there is only a subject or a thinking mind is the essence of the idealist approach. Philosophical idealism is sometimes connected with religious belief systems in the sense of an all-seeing supreme being. Idealism can be better understood as one aspect of knowledge, the exploration of the mind or psyche, but which may play down its connection with the human body or nature. Epicurus, who lived 341 to 270 BCE, created his own school known as the Garden, at which women and slaves were welcome. He sought to free people from fear and anxiety, especially about death, which he said was the end of both body and mind. He proposed the idea of atomic swerve, which was allied to free will in humans. 2 centuries later, the Roman poet Lucretius, 99 to 55 BCE, declared in verse that the universe was made of an infinite number of atoms in his long poem on the nature of things, De Rerum Natura, where he describes in a beautiful way the movement of dust particles in a ray of sunshine. In conclusion, it's clear that philosophy has diverse global origins and that the Eastern Mediterranean was a melting pot. So far, we've only been looking at male thinkers, but here is a Greek woman called Espazia, who also came from Miletus, but then moved to Athens. Oxford scholar Armand Danjour has rescued Espazia from the misogynist slanders of history. He notes that she may well have been Socrates' partner. Danjour describes her as an intellectual midwife who helped to give birth to European philosophy. Materialist philosophies also arose in India. Author Ramkrishna Bhattacharya has compared the Chavarka school to the pre-Socratic philosophers in Greece. He notes that they not only admitted the materiality of the world, but also tried to pinpoint the elements that constitute this materiality. There is a Chavarka saying echoing this: earth, water, fire and air are the principles, nothing else. Bhattacharya concludes that, in spite of widely different concepts of matter in both Western and Indian tradition, materialism as a doctrine holds its distinct position in the history of philosophy. In China, the 8th to 3rd centuries BCE saw the rise of a period described as the contention of the 100 schools of thought. It saw the greatest advances in philosophy, literature, arts, music, and culture overall. It was a period of great instability and warfare, as powerful feudal states swallowed up smaller ones, the period of the warring states, 400 to 221 BCE. Thinkers cut loose from their states, started their own schools, or preached their own vision and attracted followers. As ancient rites and customs were replaced by administrative bureaucracies, the breakdown of old ways made the period of the warring states a brilliant and creative period in the history of Chinese thought. Alongside the Confucianist and legalist schools was Taoism, or Tao. It looked back to an ideal age of prehistory. The Taoists advocated a policy of inaction and quietism, helpful for ordinary people in troubling times. It's a deeply mystical approach. The name Tao literally means the way or path, but its wider meaning is a metaphysical first principle, a vast oneness that precedes and generates the diverse forms of the world. The written text called Tao Te Ching shares with Heracletus a love of contradictory truths. To collect, first scatter. To weaken, first strengthen. To abolish, first strengthen. To conclude, first initiate. In identifying basic trends, we need to distinguish between what a thinker considered to be the basic issues and his or her approach. In other words, to distinguish between the content of a philosophy and its form. Any approach, idealist or materialist, may be turned into fixed notions, lifeless abstractions, which take it away from the living movement of reality. We can reflect on how theories of knowledge, religions, and belief systems may help or hold back creative, revolutionary approaches to the world, and how they relate to today's political attitude and practices.